So that was kind of a big deal for me, because when you make that leap, which is what I did, because that was the right answer, you run into something that is very predictable, but also could be very discouraging. And that is, you have to realize you've never done this before. So it's going to be worse before it gets better, because
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to do it as good as you can avoid having the problem happen. So you got to muddle through the hard knocks of making the screw ups and yelling at someone when you probably should have gave them a hug, because eventually it does settle through and it makes sense. And it all comes down to trusting your body to handle the emotion, if you're smart enough to know which emotion should be in charge.
I went into hiding because I knew that I would start tripping all over myself. So I haven't been saying much. I haven't been seeing people or anything like that for the last couple of hours.
Yeah.
As I felt like I had all the tools necessary to find the balance between logic, emotion, and everything. But and normally I would feel peace when I find that moment, but for some reason my body just it's like worse than procrastination.
I think today's lecture might help you then, because this one is beneath the shadow.
I was hoping to, because I've been looking to, well, I mean, I'm not talking, but I would just like read and look at stuff, hoping to find something to spark that.
Yep. So this is going to take what you should have learned, and I'm gonna stress the word should, what you should have learned about shadowboxing from my previous lectures on it, and shows you how to take that formula and turn it into a pattern that gives you infinite creativity to expand your perspective. And the way that you navigate it is the same way that you get information from your shadow. So that's why having a communication with your shadow is part of the prerequisite. That's why the shadow one as a language needs to be understood, because this is how to take that tool and use it very specifically to give you the right tool for the job with a very high percentage chance that you're going to get it right.
You know, next, something else that I'm experiencing at the moment. Well, I have 3 people inside I identify with, and that's my consciousness in 3 different parts for easy refill. Because like I have the warrior, so he kind of has she has a whole, system underneath her. She covers a lot.
What do they all agree on?
That they have to work for the best benefit of me. Well, which is, like, for me, yes, they all need to come together and work together for one cause, and that is me, us, however you want to word it as.
What else do they have in common? What about like core principles?
All right, so we have, let me see, right? We have the warrior, the monk, and the hippie.
So they all sound like peace-oriented or potentially reactionary oriented. Like that sounds like a very cohesive group. Like they're different in presentation.
Yeah, but
their tone is very similar. Does that make sense?
Yes, the tone is the same. It's just they have the different languages that they will express them through.
Okay, so they have a core unification quality that they share.
Which is us, me.
Which is the tone, their tone as well.
Right. Well, yeah,
so that's 2 points now that they have in common: their dedication and devotion to you, and the values with which they choose to channel their unique expressions.
Yes.
So that's 2 points where they share a thing. So now there are 3 separate things that have 2 things in common. You see what you're doing when you do that is you're slowly getting them to understand each other enough that they no longer need to separate.
Well, actually, they actually play together. I mean, they're not separate, but they just handle situations differently, and different situations they will be required to go forward too.
Now, do they bother you when you're busy?
No, because I will rely on either one of them or probably all three of them at the same time, depending
Oh,
on
so
what.
that was the test, is they're not disruptive to your life. They don't inject or interject.
Until now, I think the hippie needs upgrading because for the last couple of times I had an issue, it was always in
Well, hang on,
direction.
there is one that you should program to interject frequently, and that is your self-doubt. So if if the one thing that won't leave you alone is questioning you, that's the good one. Don't turn that one down. I don't know what it was doing, but that's why I wanted to say that first, so you wouldn't think I was playing my hand after the fact. I wanted you to know
No,
that
no, no.
it was a pure thought, like it wasn't tailored to respond to what you had said. That's why I wanted to say it first.
The other two not very pleased because, as I say, she keeps on causing disturbances, things that they now have to slow down and fix. They don't feel like it's fair. And kind of like she also doesn't feel like it's fair. She feels like she's free spirited and it's not like they shouldn't have a see that they should come together more than just see that she's being a pest.
Like, so that's a good question. So there's a question that I have for all three of them and you. Is the goal what is good for Patricia, or is the goal what is fair? And why can't you have both at the same time?
What is in my mind, like I've honestly thinking what is good for Patricia really would go against what I feel about how I would act to other people. Like, I would allow everybody to have their space and time. And just like I want Hippie to have her space and time and do.
Oh, that's
Um,
an interesting division though. So Patricia, do you think that if it's good for you, it has to be bad for someone else?
Let me see. If it's good for me, it has to be bad for someone else, meaning.
That's kind of what that was kind of the vibe I was picking up. Like you were worried about, well, if it's good for me, then what about so-and-so? I was including a potential future where good for you included the ability to exercise your morality in a way that's consistent with strong ethics that you believe in, so that you wouldn't be in those situations. Like I'm saying, you can have it all, was my challenge diplomatically. And what would it take between the four of you if you work together to make that happen? And is that goal worth the effort of forging that alliance and going through these specific hoops? Because all of you could see from your own individual perspectives that yes, the final goal gets there, and that's what everybody wants, and we all can make it happen if we do our part and don't fight each other.
Yeah, well, that's what I would like my final destination to be. So right now, I'm torn between upgrading her forcefully, which the other two really want because they're tired of getting in trouble. But I think that I shouldn't, because I should give her, as I said, allow her to understand why we're making that choice and don't just like shove it down her throat.
Well, I'd say it's not fair to impose the choices as a list, but it is fair to press for a choice to be made, or a request to explain what it would take to satisfy. Like that is a legitimate request that should be honored in any honest negotiation where resolution is the goal. So if it truly is a well-intentioned part of you, because it means to help you, because helping you helps it, then it should be okay telling you what it would take to make it happy. And then you, as the intermediary, would have to creatively figure out how to explain that in terms that also make sense to the other two, and also accurately translate that information so everybody sees the same goal and also feels like they are getting what they want because they can see it from their side of the benefit instead of the side of the benefit of the person who's explaining what they see for them.
Yeah, that is exactly what I need for to be able to work it anyway.
Well, luckily this was recorded, so you'll have access to that long-winded explanation and hope that I got most of it right along the way. All right, I'm gonna get started on the lecture. Tony's running a little behind, so he can jump in.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming. So today's lecture is Beneath the Shadow, the Shadow Part 2, but it's not really the Shadow Part 2. It's the Shadow 2, like Calculus 1 and Calculus 2. They're different animals. Like this is more complicated than the Shadow 1. That's what the 2 is for. So it's literally the layer beneath the shadow. This is the easiest way to learn a thing. And once you learn that thing, because you can study it so reliably by using the metaphor of the shadow, you can extract a core framework from that dynamic and use it to change your perspectives, to very quickly find which one is the most relevant tool for your current job. So it won't give you the knowledge or the experience to do a thing you've never learned how to do before, but it will give you the ability to very quickly narrow down what you are missing and what you would need to provide in some way, shape, or form to circumvent whatever roadblocks there are between you and your chosen goal. So a lot of these previous lectures have been how to understand your goals and what motivates you. How to choose wise goals has been a part of that. It has to be, because I feel honesty fuels most of what I've explained in this process. So other languages that explain consciousness might exist, but if those languages are self-deceptive or contain intentional deception in any way, I don't understand how they work. And the way that I explain these things would not be compatible without the underlying framework that these things do not change, and learning how to see them honestly is the key to navigating that. A different assumption would need different math to explain it. It would be neat if that were true, by the way. I would love it if somebody could use a completely different language with completely different assumptions and be able to predict the same result. Because that would mean both of us are right fundamentally about something that we understand completely wrong. And that's what you need to figure out. Like if you have two broken watches that both have the right answer, you have enough information to figure out how to make it tick. So that's an exciting thing when that happens. So beneath the shadow. So I'll start with the definitions. The shadow, I'm using the same definition of the shadow that I've used for the entire lecture series. That is the parts of ourself we go out of our way to pretend don't exist. That's my official definition of the shadow. It's the part of ourselves we don't like to acknowledge is a part of us. The things that we reject are the things that we become without realizing it. The things that we admire are the things we feel that we lack on some level. That's the whole shadow concept. So that's what I'm talking about here. And that's how I've always explained it. So that would be the equivalent of algebra. All right, you've got very good algebra when it comes to the shadow. And it's very formulaic. You know, you got your y equals mx plus b and your quadratic equation and your whatever metaphor you want to use. There are tricks of the trade when it comes to exploring your own shadow that just are knockout patterns for any shadow boxing practice fight. Like if you go to a gym and you try to mentally toughen yourself up, then shadow boxing is a part of that. And any mind that tries to toughen itself up will give itself harder and harder opponents. And it won't do that to punish itself, because that's not how training works. Training always works at a pace that you're comfortable going. But if you get better over time, long enough, a satisfying process can prevent you from ever even noticing that you completely had the talent to avoid complete disaster, when previously it would have been far more than you could have ever handled or had any hope against, knowing how to do it, just as a side effect. So that's kind of my 5-minute sales pitch for why it's a good idea. By all means, if everybody did it, the people who did it would get less of a benefit from having done it. They would actually be behind if they didn't. So I like it when I can work to gain an advantage. I don't like it when I have to work not to fall behind. So the less of you that take my advice, the better for me in the short term. Like the worst for all of you in the long run. But I've already done everything I can by that point. Make people listen to anything. You gotta figure out how it's a good idea on your own. So that's the shadow. Beneath the shadow. So beneath. I'm talking about a change in scalar perspective. All right. So I'm demonstrating with the title that this is a zooming in. This is a zooming in. So the pieces become non-referential to the step before it without understanding the size conversion that is happening. It's like, it would be like looking at two images, but not having the little box around it that shows you which part is being magnified. So that's what I'm talking about. It's the ability to magnify out without losing resolution, without losing the connection between the large and the small. It means there's rules to the way the scale behaves when you change. So you have to take those into account. That's what I mean by beneath the shadow. So this is the shadow I've explained as the things we go out of our way to pretend don't exist are true about ourselves. But now I'm going to go beneath that concept and show you how proper shadow boxing can be applied to many different ways of thought. And I'm going to cycle through a bunch of them and kind of show you the possibilities that become open. And the nice thing about this is it's a type of perspective power up that lasts as long as you have the patience to try another thought. So it becomes almost a meditative state of self-hypnosis, where if you have the proper focus on changing your focus until you have the right one, eventually the idea will come if you believe in the process long enough. And that is kind of what that's the mathematical, joyless explanation of what those incredible people do by feeling alone, standing under a waterfall for 8 hours meditating, trying to understand that very specific thing that I just explained, that zoomed in, incredibly specific thing. They are coming to understand by experience alone, to the point where they can identify it exactly physically and reproduce its effects. So I don't want to take anything away from that. That's incredible. To be able
Is that
to
like
know that way? What's that?
Tom, is that like the feeling that you get when you, all right, you see like how you were speaking about going through choices just now? When you're in that place where things align to your ideas to help put a thought together, right? You know, like the pieces come together and
Okay, you had some pieces come together.
like it, if you were looking at it in a connective way, if you were like in a logical way, you could see the pieces coming together, right? But you could also feel it.
Yes. Yes.
You could align at the exact spot where it's just you, and that's the spot for you. And it's give it, well, when it aligned there, then they will look at what is required at that point. Because then you could see the logic and what it is you want.
And the way that you confirm that it's true is you can sit at the same spot and cycle as many different perspectives as you care to on it and find ways that all of them are true.
Yeah.
So that
right.
is the power behind what is beneath the shadow, because that gives you the ability to understand truth, which is very limited, and the most unlimited way you are capable of exploring it. So you make the most out of a very limited thing.
As you start to show me the price that I'm going to pay for what I align for with, because once I get that feeling, as I say, now I can open my eyes and logically put the pieces together, because it's easier for me to feel it than to build
I
it.
might be able to give you a shortcut, Patricia, but I want to warn you, this would be like jumping a circuit. You might feel a spark.
I like sparks.
Okay, how much this hurts you is going to be exactly as much as the love you have forgotten how to give to other people without expecting something in return, which is a reflection of how much love you're withholding from yourself, experiencing in real time.
Okay.
That's my guess.
No, I'm following.
That's
No,
that's the connection. That doesn't make the spark, then maybe it's a different thing. That was my guess.
But go ahead. I'm sorry. Let's
No,
continue.
I love if I help a thought evolve in front of me and I can help somebody bring their thought more to light too, I think that helps everybody. It helps me, so I always encourage it. All right, so when I talked about shadow boxing before, I'm gonna explain, again, just go through a very easy example of what it means to shadow box. And when I mean box, I'm using metaphors that reduce consciousness to an exchange of punches or a martial arts dance. It's a very story circle oriented interaction. It follows a narrative process. There is a confrontation with the unknown. There's a call to adventure. There's rising action, mystical aid, conflict, and then really it depends, because in the stories that we tell ourselves, if we don't understand the story right, we tell the story so that the hero loses and has to start over. So that is a very powerful thing to understand when it comes to knowing what it means to be able to see that pattern. It's the same pattern. So when I talk about what it means to shadow box, like, yes, you can look at a thing and ask yourself, why does it make you react? And you can say, well, this is because reactions are visceral. So you're using the same standard of measurement every time when you explore the shadow, which means the shadow is really the disgust sensitivity narrow band of the self. So your shadow is everything that you're disgusted by to the point where you don't want to see it. That's kind of a more visceral definition of the shadow. So when I say beneath the shadow, well, that's just one way of measuring your consciousness. Now, the reason I spend so much time on the shadow is because it is where all of the things we don't see live. Okay, so that's a very important reason to look there. It is the place where only the blind can find their way around. And strangely enough, being born, from my perspective, and I could explain it and map it using principles that I've built throughout this whole class, which is the way I have come to understand myself in reverse. My first lecture was the first thing I figured out. Where I'm at now is closer to some of the last things I figured out. This was the process. So when I talk about it that way, I have to trust my process at this point, because too much of it keeps building on itself stably for it to be nonsense. And when I say that this was built using guesses made off of mathematical models, and then experiments were done to see how closely parallel those mathematical models taken from physics textbooks were to situations in real life, that was the guy that built the machine. And then it was tested. So this was created through correlation with science. I stole somebody else's work and made it work with consciousness. And that gave me the building blocks I needed, because physics had enough of it right when it comes to quantum theory. And physics has enough of it right when it comes to general relativity. And the story circle metaphors for development of consciousness are so reliable that the parts where physics fails to unify quantum scale with general relativity are able to be circumvented with accurate metaphorical translations in and out of the harder parts of that process. If this was a math problem, it would be a transformation of a complex thing into a simple variable that behaves in a known way, which is a thing that mathematicians do all the time. They do their calculation and then follow the proper mechanics to expand it back out. That is a mathematically allowed process if you have the relationships right. So my point is that when you use these patterns, you can really take a lot from things that are already there. So this is like the scavenger's guidebook for mental education. This is all of the things you can learn for free. You don't even need a library card. You just need a little bit of creativity and the patience to grind it out. And even if you lack the creativity, you could simulate it, because there's a lecture on how to do that. That poorly crafted creativity machine will turn a person with zero creativity into someone with average to above average creativity, just by following the steps however they understand them. And to the truly creative person, that lecture will take your creativity and crank it up to 1 billion, because you're already going to have most of the pieces figured out. And you're going to see the certain elegance of putting them together in that specific way, and then that'll boom, like clearing out a drain pipe. So that's the potential I see. And hey, average to above average is incredible and life-changing in many situations. Being average at a thing is the difference between having an opportunity and not having one at all, 9 times out of 10. So that's why I recommend putting the time in to develop that. So beneath the shadow then. So one thing is always measured by internal disgust, the shadow. Well, there's other things that we have that are reliable, like our disgust sensitivity. So I'm talking about things in us that don't change, things in us that are part of us, and that is our emotional states, right? Like we all have them, and they mean different things to us, and some of us have better sensation of them than others. And some of us don't like to see certain parts of those emotional states, and we keep them hidden inside our shadow, which is why I always start with the shadow. Is you have to empty out the shadow first before you can see how many parts you really have to work with. So the shadow is your hidden inventory. So don't skip that step, because you're going to limit the amount of tools you have to do what you're trying to do, what you've been trying to do all along. Which is to go beneath the shadow. And this is kind of, the shadow is what are my tools that I've been hiding for myself. And beneath the shadow is, now what does it mean to use those tools? So that's the distinction. So you have to be able to see the tools first. So either you'll find a large list of them currently in yourself, which means you have a good self-esteem if your list has things on it that are honest. If your list is too short, either you're worthless, or perhaps you undervalue the current amount of things that you really are capable of. And if you're being less hard on yourself, you could make a longer list if you put some effort into it. So really the only failure at that moment would be a failure of attitude and effort, when all of your other skills and talents would say that, yeah, you're able to do more than you probably think you are. So that's kind of what I think about that. So some of these tools, well, you have internal disgust as a guide. So now you can look at other stable emotions. What about rage? So now you can launch a full-scale investigation on the concept of rage. And you can do it using all of the tools in this lecture, which means you understand how to turn rage into a zero-dimensional concept, 1D, 2D, 3D, 4D, and even 5-dimensional thought, meaning you could add complexity onto this that would give you the ability to accurately predict social situations to a degree of accuracy that is almost certain, so long as you are properly understanding the situation that you are entering. So it's using a theory that says every situation has a specific series of actions that would result in the optimal outcome for the person participating in them. Hypothetically, that exists. That's the claim. Like, there's a way to do it right, even if that way doesn't always make sense. So what this does is it shows you how to find that way, even if you don't understand why it's the right way. And that's kind of a scary thought sometimes, because that means giving up a certain level of control over what you're really giving up control over, if I'm being blunt about it, is how much you're willing to trust yourself not to be stupid. And how much you're willing to be patient with yourself to let your emotions be in charge of things they've never been in charge of before. And how fair are you being with both of those things in relation to each other? Is one of them getting far more resources than the other, when really they are a fairly balanced pair? And avoiding one over the other is, well, surprise from previous lectures, a clear sign that some shadow work needs to be done on that concept. Like if it sparks suspicion and avoidance, when that is the suggested course of action, well, until that suspicion is understood well enough that the suspicion is no longer there, there's something left to figure out. So rage. What I mean by rage is, now you don't understand rage the way you used to. Most people have a very linear concept of rage. This is what it means when I'm angry. This makes me angry. That's as far as it goes. The vast percentage of the population right now, and I wish this would grow because we'd have less problems because people could see things more similarly. The vast percentage of the population right now just sees rage as an unavoidable state of mind with preconceived notions behind it. There's a morality attached to a feeling that's a core part of the human experience. Rage is not optional. Rage is a response to a thing that we don't understand, and likely at some level a thing that we are creating for ourselves. And if we don't understand why that rage happens, well, then we become its servant, because we realize the monster it turns us into when we lose control of it, and then we do whatever it takes to make sure that doesn't happen. So our world is made smaller by offering that concession, because somewhere inside the self doesn't see itself as responsible enough to take that burden onto itself where it belongs. So it shifts the responsibility. It disassociates from it. And then all of a sudden, rage becomes a thing where a lot of useful tricks, tips, and frankly, socially relevant tools reside. So it is not rage that is misunderstood in the sense that it's good or bad. It's rage that is misunderstood in the sense of when it's appropriate, when it should be expected, when it can't be compromised, and to what strength is appropriate if the goal is an optimal response. Meaning, rage may be the correct answer, and properly applied at the end, everyone will agree it was fair, because they will see the rage only attacked a thing that threatened to destroy the entire process. And it was only targeted at that point, not even through the individual who was channeling that ignorance. There was a separation there as well. That's the proper use of rage. It is as precise as a gamma ray scalpel trying to remove a tumor. And most people understand rage as a billy club that you hit someone over the head with. So when I talk about shadow boxing, and when I talk about how you could transfer that pattern from your disgust sensitivity into your rage, now you can begin to understand your rage and say, why does that make me angry? What does it mean to be angry? Should I be angry then? When am I in control of my anger? When you lose control, that's shadow work. When is anger the right call? How do people respond to it? How do I make anger effectively? There's a very fine line between being angry and being seen as unstable, and being angry and being seen as the fed up adult in the room. So that is the difference between a person who understands rage and a person who runs from it. And fair enough, because most of those people who run from it understand on some level that if they are going to become better at it than they are now, which is not even able to look at it, they're going to have to get their ass kicked by screwing up how to handle it a bunch of times before they're able to do it relatively well. And that process is what creates these barriers. We have a low tolerance to challenge ourselves in that way. And so these narratives calcify around them and prevent these little barriers. And that's what these exercises are designed to break through. And it's not that they're breaking through something that's needed. It's not a protection. It was put there as a byproduct of something else. It's unexpected consequences of perspective that came from well-intentioned choices that were made without very much conscious thought at all, just by the nature of us needing to understand as much information as we do to exist. So many choices need to get made. We have to have rules to narrow them down, and not understanding some of those rules that we use to narrow things down will create a lot of blind spots. So the only blind spots you really have to worry about are the blind spots you try to protect, which is why I talk about the shadow first. After that, you're happy to find a blind spot. So these techniques become much easier because no tool of exploration is out of bounds so long as it is honest and fairly measured. So you can become as self-deprecating as you want, so long as you're being fair, and so long as you're not judging yourself by a standard you didn't know existed until moments ago. You can mourn the lost potential, which many people do, which I do. And that's just a recognition of what you lost by not figuring it out sooner. But that type of experience should be one that you're also thankful to get eventually, because every moment you don't have it is a lost opportunity for every moment after that. So whenever it ends is a good time. Even if it ended after too long, like you can't hang on to that either, because that's just dragging the whole process out even further. So that's one example of how you can use the shadow boxing techniques to really make sense of a lot of things very quickly. So I'm gonna use another example of what it means to go beneath the shadow. And this is a big one for a lot of people. The masculine and the feminine. All right. So I'm going to talk about the masculine and the feminine. And there's a lot of different definitions for this. And I'm going to be using my own because this is how I understand it. So understand it my way, or figure it out your own way. My way works when I do it the way I say how it works. Your system's probably good too. So the masculine and the feminine that I talk about have some specific roles that they represent. So when I talk about the masculine, I talk about the order, the restriction, the dominance, the power, and the authority to impose. When I talk about the feminine, I talk about the creative, the gentle, the seductive, the far-reaching, the conciliatory, the compassionate, the balance, the fury. That's what I see the feminine as. If you want to distill that down, that concept, that is a three-dimensional idea that I just gave you, a three-dimensional definition of the masculine and a three-dimensional definition of the feminine. So now if you want to reduce the dimensionality to a more compressed thought that contains all of that information, the masculine is the creative force in all of its potential, positive and negative. And the feminine is the destructive force in all of its potential, positive and negative. And that is the, if you really want to be symbolic on it and you want to stretch it a little bit, it's mapping the white spot inside the black spot of the yin and yang symbol, and mapping exactly how the black spot inside the white spot behaves as part of the whole. So it's really showing, I think a better, what's the word? a better metaphorical representation of the yin yang symbol would be a Mobius strip that was black on one side and white on the other. And the way that they met was a single spot where the black was white and the white was black. Because then metaphorically, it would explain exactly how I understand the masculine and the feminine, and logic and emotion being one language of thought. As long as you can map the shared circle in forward and reverse, you have the translation to reverse map any place that you've previously been. So that's, you can learn things because you know the relationship, and you know the conversion, and you know the rules. That's the point of that one. But that's kind of a little, that's more of a technical explanation. That's a little bit harder to use. So if these lectures really make sense to you, or generally make sense to you, but this one got a little fuzzy, I apologize. If these lectures really make sense to you, and you have to work hard to understand that one, you'll understand it the way I do then, because it's really hard for me to understand it. It works. I can't explain it simply yet. I don't understand it that well. I'm not
You
Einstein.
actually explained it very well.
You got it. I can make it work, but I can't give you my tools because my tools are janky and cobbled together. They work, but they're not mass producible. I need a consumer friendly model. So
I think
go
of
ahead.
us. No, I said I think that's most of us too. You know, like because as always, we know how to move them forward, backward, every which direction.
Mhm.
And another human sometimes doesn't grasp it as easily as we would like them to see our explanation of it.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. That's a really good metaphor, because then if you can learn how to just map a spot on their Mobius strip, as it were, and you've mapped how that strip behaves inside you, then you can start to use that as a guide to make some pretty seemingly ludicrous leaps of logic with a pretty good degree of accuracy that you're going to be close to where you thought you were going to land. That's kind of how I do my you know, that little Sherlock Holmes trick I do where I predict how you're feeling.
Yeah.
And I stare inside your soul, and it's like, how does he do that? Well, that's just the best math I know how to use. It's my party trick. It's my big finisher. This is the farthest I can see, and I have to be a little vague with some of it because I don't see which direction it's pointing. It's that far away. It's like a star in the sky. I'm locating it by its gravitational wobble. So that it's a joyless, it's not a joyless process, because I take joy that it's possible. But that it's reproducible is not the part I take joy in, because that part's pretty dull and a little confusing at times. So beneath the shadow then. So another example, that was two examples. Another example of beneath the shadow is, now you can start to get metaphysical with it. Well, wait, I didn't finish the masculine and the feminine. So the masculine and the feminine, the creative and the destructive, really. So what that means is every emotion, logic, disagreement that we have, I want to say that again because it's very broad, and that's intentionally broad. I think this is that powerful of a connection. Every logical and emotional disagreement we have is some metaphorical interaction of a masculine and feminine dynamic. Meaning there's two dances going on that are complementary to each other, but both of those dances are stable over time and don't go anywhere. So it's more of a recognition that you've stalled. It's kind of what I was getting at there. So let me take a second and just see if there's any questions here. Patricia, Ben, how you guys holding up? I feel like I'm going a little fast. You guys?
No, tell me you're going at a great pace.
Okay. All right, I'll take that as a clue to keep going. So the masculine and the feminine. So what that means is, if you've got a disagreement between your logic and your emotion, if you have sufficient mental creativity to form a narrative out of it, where there is a masculine component and a woman component, and you just give them traditional roles or roles that you would normally, whatever your standard is, give it to them. Personify the logic, personify the emotion. And if you can do that, you should be able to recognize that narrative somewhere else. And I'll give you a hint. That somewhere else will very likely be the types of entertainment you're interested in. So if you like time travel movies, there is likely a logic emotion disagreement you have going on that you could trace to that. And that's using the quantum mathematics part of this lecture that I gave previously. The way to map the very small shows you how to do that sort of leaps of logic. So it's a different scale than what we're talking about now, but it's very interesting, and you can get there from here. The chain is unbroken. But the point is, just by turning things into a story between a masculine and feminine dynamic, if you can properly assign the parts and honestly play out where they would go, that is how you could teach yourself things about yourself you were not previously ready to understand. Because you've been given a gift of television that maybe doesn't resonate. You have been given a reservoir of pop culture knowledge and examples of fundamental human expressions that have been cataloged and archived inside of beloved characters. So much of the wisdom that we didn't know existed has been given to us and has been chopped up by our brain and stored with our nostalgia so that we'll never lose it. So that's kind of why I think it's a big deal to know what's going on. There's a lot there. So that's just from the masculine and the feminine dynamic. That's all shadowboxing 101. But the pattern changes. So the procedure changes. Oh, you know what I mean? The pattern is the same, but the steps change. You notice a thing, you do a translation, you run it through the story circle, then you get the result. So it is, you notice it the same way, meaning you look at this through the eyes of the shadow. What is this I'm discussing about with myself? Am I avoiding any of it? No. Do I still understand it? No. Okay, so what else is going on? Maybe it's this. Okay, what if I turn it into a story of a man and a woman interacting? What does that look like? Well, that would make the man doing this, and I guess he looks kind of controlling, and maybe the woman is missing back. So maybe the logic here is too harsh, would be your takeaway from that exercise. You would tell that little story and try to personify it, and you could give yourself hints as to things that might be tripping you up, things you hadn't thought about before. So you'll have to be the one that notices them. But that's how you could uncover them, using that specific dynamic. So I'm going to try and give you as many of these as I can. There's a lot of them, as many of them as you can creatively imagine. So this is not all of the tools in the toolbox. I've already given you the method to make the tools. Now I'm giving you examples of tools I have made. Your tools will be different and will be suited to your skill set. The more honest you are about the things you are good at, and the doubly honest you are about the things you're bad at, the better your tools will be at doing what you try to get them to do. So that's how you're going to test how good your tools are, is when you use them, they need to do what they should. If they do not, you have to try again, because something is wrong, probably an assumption about how the tool is supposed to work, or what powers it, or how to make it reality. It's not as simple as you think it is if it doesn't work. You made an assumption of simplicity somewhere. That assumption did not belong. That's the test. Go ahead, Patricia, what's up?
One layer I add to my masculine and feminine is to help me identify it easily, is that if I give them the characteristics of the elements fire and water.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
So when I try to, like, once I come up to a situation, I would either look for that or I look for hard. Yeah. Once I feel some too hard, I know it has too much logic in it. And if it, like, emotions is just kind of like crazy. So I can see that would really be the
So
problem.
run through the 5 for me real quick, because I want to make sure I got a clear map of the little checklist that you do. So one of them you said, which one was logic?
Logic is fire, the creative force.
Logic was fire and the creative
I like the
force.
masculine energy as well for me.
And the
All of these
masculine.
are put in together.
Okay, got it. So fire is masculine creative force. What's water? Is that the feminine?
Yeah, emotion.
The become, the flow like, the fill.
Yeah, and they could go anywhere.
Got
through
it. What about the wind?
Well, wind will have to be, for me, I look at wind as, well, wind as air, right? And that would be
Yes.
perception. Perception.
Air
If I
is
was to put
perception.
anything
I've
towards it,
heard that interpretation before. Yes, the air is what rises above.
yes.
The thing that fills any crack, but may get trapped in a box.
So I would use, well, so you know why I go there with that one.
Yep, makes sense. Okay, so that's 3. What's left? Metal,
We
wood?
have earth. If you were going with those 4 kind of elements, looking at, but first we just start off with the feminine and masculine, right?
Yeah.
But we went to other elements, which would be kind of like stretching from there a bit. So air would be perception, as I said. But if I was good, I like to use the 4 elements.
Okay, so not 5, the 4. 4 not, I was confusing it with the Chinese 5-element system.
I still kind of weavy on the last one because of here what I find that when I work the 4 elements and I get them in their right alignment.
No, maybe you need the 5th one, or maybe you need the 5 Chinese. So because you were just, I don't know if you did you invent this on your own or did you borrow this from somewhere? Because
I borrow it from all sorts of places, so now it becomes mine because it's not
right.
consistent with any
2 of
particular
them you described perfectly mimic the descript. No, 3 of them that you described perfectly mimic the descriptions of the 5 Chinese medicine wheel.
Right.
So that would mean that if you feel like something's missing, it's probably one of those 2 remaining ones, especially if you've got 3 of them dead on. So I don't know what's missing for you, but if you probably narrowed it down to a list of like 10 or 12 things.
But as I don't know, but I just put this out there. I find like
Yes.
when you see 4 together,
Uh-huh.
they create a unification that would come as the 5th. But I was never able to find a 5th element to
Oh my
work
God, did you just say
alongside
you couldn't find the 5th element? Every Bruce Willis fan. The 5th Element, the movie.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, is this really, am I in this movie right now? Was what I was living through. I would never, nobody would ever say that to me seriously again. That's as close as I'll ever get to being in that movie. That was the moment that washed over me when you said that. I couldn't stop it. I could share it with you.
What is the 5th element that I should be looking at?
It's just an old movie. It's a sci-fi movie. It's over the top. It's really
But the girl
well
with
done.
pink hair, right? I think I remember looking at that movie. I think it was
Yeah, the 5th Element. The 5th Element. Like Chris Rock is in Chris Tucker. I think it's Chris. I get the Chris's mixed up. One of the Chris's, very famous, deserves more respect than I'm giving him now by not remembering his name. He was wearing a lot of makeup, to be fair. He just does this stellar performance of like this diva character, and it just totally steals the show. Highly recommend it. 5th Element. All right, moving on. No, were you done sharing? I didn't mean to be moving on. Are we done? You tell me if we're moving on.
Yeah, we're moving on.
Okay, we're moving on up. We're gonna move on up to the. Now I can't say anymore without infringing on intellectual property. You get 3 notes. Moving on. Gotta move on. So mental.
Let's cut you off.
Oh, sorry about that. So beneath the shadow. So that was 2 ways. The masculine and the feminine. That's a really good one. But yeah, I was just going to touch on the 5 Chinese medicine concept. Patricia Matt has her own version of it, and it probably does everything she needs it to, or as much as she needs it to do now. Who knows? You know, sometimes good enough is good enough, because you could do this infinitely. That's the thing. So you got to make sure you don't Yeah. You
No
gotta
full
balance
stop.
it out. You gotta balance it out. Like, you can't just have good ideas all day, because you'll never get anything done. So you need to set limits on really what your goal is ahead of time. So the infinite perspective machine is not a thing that you just want to leave on. Unless you're like doing a meditation. Like, you want to have a specific reason for leaving it on, and probably that specific reason shouldn't be in charge of something you're trying to get done, because the perspective machine does not move. It's not designed to move. It's designed to enhance precision and utility. And creatively used, it can find out exactly how many tools you have access to for any specific job. So let's talk about a different dynamic. Discipline. A lot of people struggle with discipline. And a lot of people have stuff inside their shadow dealing with discipline. So that means a proper understanding of discipline gives you power over anybody who doesn't understand when it should and shouldn't be used, because you'll get to use it correctly and they will not. And they won't understand why, because they don't know how discipline properly works, because nobody ever showed them, or they rejected it. So they don't understand that discipline itself is not a bad thing when parts of that discipline are deserved. And that when it is deserved is usually when a predetermined, agreed upon responsibility has not been met. So then discipline as a means of motivation is a shared thing. It really is the poke at the end of the stick that everyone says we should avoid. And we put it there so that we have something to avoid. So we motivate ourselves in the right direction. That's really what that's dealing with when it comes to the proper use of discipline. But so people don't understand that if you reject discipline, you also reject a good portion of motivation. So their fear of discipline leaves them dead in the water. And they don't know why, because the part of themselves that's disgusted with discipline is hiding in their shadow. But the nice thing about it is, if you understand how that works well enough to see someone else trapped in it, you can help them shadow box their way out. You can fight with them. The way you do that is you give their shadow form as a devil's advocate, but you also give them form as a skilled advisor. So you create the enemy, but you create a narrative that they can understand. And you work them through what you understand. And maybe it's not enough, maybe it's not right, but it's what you have. And if you're wrong, they can tell you how you're wrong. And you can use that as a way to correct some bias you had in yourself that you didn't understand, a thing you didn't know how to measure. You didn't know how it was important. They can teach you that by what you get wrong, which is why it's important to listen when people tell you you're wrong. It's not enough to have somebody say you're wrong. You need to explain how and why, because that's what's required to do better. So that's another one. Another one you can use the same principle on to expand your perspective is a proper understanding of trust. Talk about trust. How many people have too many rules about what it means to give trust? How many of those rules deal with how much trust is allowed, what it means to trust? Can you trust somebody in different dimensions? I don't mean spatially, I don't mean, sci-fi. I mean, can you trust someone to be a good employee, but not necessarily a good friend? Could you trust somebody to be good at keeping a secret, but not necessarily good at keeping a promise? How able are you to divide your dimensions of trust into ways that lets you lead a world where you have people you can count on? Are the things required for you to give trust fair? Are they possible? And then if they are, well, you can repeat the process again. What dimensions are they possible? What can you trust? If trust is too big of a concept to swallow because you've never done it before, you need a bunch of examples about what kinds of trust there are before the whole concept is going to make sense. Here's a really good one. Learn how to trust your body when it makes you feel pain. And I mean emotional pain. I don't mean physical pain. You should trust your body when it gives you physical pain. You shouldn't ignore that. Go see a doctor if it's bad enough. But when your body gives you emotional pain, you shouldn't run from that. And so that means, what can you learn with a proper understanding of the value of honest pain? Do you run from the pain so fast that you run from its message? Here's the test. If the pain comes back again when you get too close, you ran away before you saw what was there. If the pain is uncomfortable next time, but you're able to easily get through it, then you got it right. That's the test. You can decide what those things mean, but that's how you know. So another example of how to use the same shadowboxing techniques to have different perspectives by measuring things using a similar process. What's a good one? Oh, here's one. The concept of, let's talk about the concept of love. What does it mean to love? How deeply do you understand that question? Could you put together a couple words on it? Are you, maybe a little bit more prolific? You've had a good relationship or two, and you got a little bit of experience, so you can write a few things down, or do you got a lot of experience, or do you got the wrong kinds of experience? What kind of lies do you believe about love that you act like are true? These are all questions that filter into an understanding of love. But if you want to skip to the big question, is imagine a thing that you used to love. Now, imagine that thing is gone. Examples of this may include, but are not limited to, the death of a loved one or the end of a meaningful relationship. That's the level of transition I'm talking about here. So a severe emotional change. The question is, are you able to keep the love that you experience with them, while also letting the future of that relationship go? That is the test of love right there. And here's why it's a test. And it's a test you shouldn't fail. Because here's what it means to fail that test. You made something real to you that was made out of love, which is a very difficult thing to do. And you threw it away. Which means not only do you have less of it than you did before, which is the loss that you feel, self-inflicted, and that's the cause. Not only is that the loss that you feel, but when you really get down to it, you make it harder to love the same way again, because you feel like a part of you knows it's possible that you'll just throw it away again. And so you'll care less about having done it, which makes it easier to throw away next time because it's worth less. because you put less into it. And you notice a poor return on investment without necessarily acknowledging why there was less than there should have been, or why there was less than there was last time. It ignores the withdrawal. And it ignores that that withdrawal is a choice to attempt to erase the past because it was not compatible with the future, which only happens when normally you try to make the future into the past and you run out of options. So the only choice left is a rewrite. And that is a destructively painful thing to do to yourself mentally. So let me put it a different way. If being able to love a person for who they are is a virtue, and being able to find the good in anybody is a virtue, and you love somebody and it ends with betrayal or it ends with heartbreak, the next person that you find needs to be a better person than the person that you loved the first time for you to believe that your love will have a chance. Because your ability to love somebody who was like that failed. And you'll only go through it again if you think it's an upgrade from before. That's the process, by the way. And here's why that's a bad process. Feels like a good idea at the time. Feels like standards, feels like blah, feels like this, feels like that. There's rational expectations to be had. But there's a reality check that has to happen too. So that's kind of the little tangent about how to explore that. Let me think about another one here. Another good one. So yeah, love is just to close the loop on that one. It makes more sense. I would agree with it much more. Oh, I got distracted by the chat. So what I mean is the less, the more you are willing to throw love away, the more spectacular of a person it will take to bring love from you. And eventually humanity will run out of potential before you run out of ways to avoid saying that you are wrong. That's what I say about love. If you really understand love, you need to be able to love someone who broke your heart. Because both of those moments are true. And pretending like the happy moments were false or need to be expunged is what does all the damage. That damage can be undone. All you have to do is go back to the memory and view it honestly. Put that perspective spinner on it, which is why I'm talking about it now. You can fix things that you remembered wrong by remembering what you knew at the time. If you have the right math and you know the progress you made, you can see the parts of yourself that were missing in that memory that led to the bad outcome. And you can make peace with that if you go back and take the time to upgrade the thought. So that's another good one. Going back into the perspective of, am I remembering this memory accurately over time? That's another one. You can just throw that into the mix. Hey, here's this thing. What's it going to look like tomorrow? What did it look like yesterday? What's it going to be 2 weeks from now? Does it repeat? How often does it repeat? Is it a pattern that doesn't repeat? Is it, what is it? That's different ways of understanding that sort of thing. But now you can get creative with it. So the point is that the limits of this technique are the limits of your creativity and your limit to accurately translate a metaphor. Do not deviate from the story circle. It's right. The story circle is how we understand information. It is a map with landmarks of the Mobius strip that we follow when we map a complete thought. The story circle is, it works. Don't mess with success. That one's a good one. So that means if you can translate what's going on into a story and you get the pieces right, you can find out what's missing. So then the ability becomes, how creatively can you imagine an appropriate story? How complicated does it need to be? Are we talking knights and castles and damsels in distress? Maybe it's a gritty crime drama with two mismatched buddy cops. Is it a physics problem that you see a clear connection between behavior and a physical part of our universe? How good are your guesses when you say this part represents this and this part represents that? And if those two parts are interacting, what are they exploring? That's the leap. What happens when I combine two perspectives I've never thought of before interacting? Can I imagine what it's like to be, a little bit skeptical? Could I create a checklist of things a person who is skeptical would do? Well, sure I could. So if I wanted to, I could create a skeptical person simulation to run an idea by if I thought to do that. Well, a skeptical person is great. They'll teach you how to second guess. But if you have a skeptical person who is good at being skeptical and you have a trusting person who is good at being trusting, those two individuals working together would cover the full range of every situation, so long as they could accurately tell who was the best suited for the current job. So that's kind of the end game of Beneath the Shadow. It is not what are my tools, it is how do I recognize the tool that exists, which is the best one for this job. And that tool is always, Patricia, you're going to find it within the air. It's the perspective. Perspective can go anywhere.
Correct.
One of the qualities of air is that it's a gas, which means gas has certain physical properties. One of them being it can expand to fill any container that holds it. And another thing about air, which is true of perspective, under enough pressure and heat or lack of heat, air becomes water, and it also becomes ice, which means if you can operate metaphorically on an idea strictly from the perspective of air, and you understand the properties that influence that air perspective, meaning you do the math of your physical body, enough that you can metaphorically change the pressure and metaphorically change the temperature, meaning to excite a thing or to compress a thing, you can then notice places where that metaphor would predict a state transition from air to water to ice. And if you're precise enough, every one of those things has what's called a triple point, which is where the air, the ice, and the water exist simultaneously in a state of fluctuating superposition. It's perfectly balanced among the blend of all three, so that any one of them is instantly possible and all of them are somehow present. So that's what air can do with the right metaphor. And you can map all of those steps, which shows you how air is water and air is earth, because ice as a solid and earth as a solid behave the same way. And once you understand how air is earth and how air is water, you can guess how air is the other two things that you don't have. But it's understanding the relationships of the metaphors of not how each of them play with each other, but how each of them changes under stress. and what it means to interact different amounts of stress on that sliding scale with two perspectives that are different from each other, and then seeing what sort of thing plays out. So that would be the story I would tell if I had two competing trains of thought, as I would make it into a competition like that where there were stakes behind it. And imagine, what would two highly competitive and competent individuals do to try and reach their goal? And then it becomes a competition. Well, it's different from just a mental exercise. I'm more likely to be a little bit more open and creative and maybe even excited about it if I frame the exercise as something exciting that could be won or lost, instead of just some bland exploration. Like, it summons creativity to have that perspective. And there are many perspectives that summon different things, and we've talked about them. The ability to physically calm your body, the ability to summon adrenaline, the ability to process information, expand perspective. Everything that I've been talking about has been pointing to this single nexus point of beneath the shadow. So this is the point where all of the tools are present to take any one of these ideas and expand them infinitely in ways that are limited by your own creativity. So the beneath the shadow, at its core, I would say, is the power of insanity. And it is the power of insanity by realizing that it is insane to assume you know anything stable. So diving into insanity is really diving deeper into logic you don't understand. And that is the power of insanity. If you can observe it accurately enough, it is not insane. It is just odd. And until it makes sense, the insanity is to deny its relevance when it is repeatable but unexplainable. So that's all I've got about this topic here. Thanks for being my student tonight. Usually Tony's a lock, but I guess he had something going on. I'm glad I didn't have to give the lecture solo. I feel like you brought some interesting things to it just by being around.
Thank you, and I enjoy your lectures. So I think I'm gonna give my mind a little more creativity. I thought I was already bad with having three people have all these different categories inside, but now no. After listening to you, I think I need a little more excitement inside of there.
Well, that's good. I think they've all seen potential to have everybody get what they want and hit a final goal, so they won't have to waste resources fighting.
Yeah.
Because if you're not fighting, what are you doing? You're having a good time. And if everybody's convinced they can have a good time, everyone will go for it.
Definitely. That's the goal there.
I hope you figure out how to have a good time. It was very recently that I figured out that all of the love that I had shared for previous relationships was not a thing I should have thrown away because the relationships ended. And I had seen that pattern in myself where, by many objective standards, because I had low standards and low self-esteem, I was dating better quality women every time a relationship ended. In terms of responsibility, reliability, compassion, good relationship quality. So I was getting, better quality people, but I did recognize the pattern of how the relationships were ending. And it wasn't until I got to my current, my wife, and she was able to handle some of the things that none of my previous relationships have been able to handle, to the point where I was able to, get myself out of it and see, how everything else had gone wrong, and it made sense how I was connected to it instead of just being this thing. But the point of all that is, I didn't realize how many good things I was capable of producing that I had tied to that love that I had thrown away. And getting that back is like getting back a lot of good parts of myself that I should have never gotten rid of in the first place. So that was my big learn. And it was a positive learn, like it was, you big dummy, why would you do that? You're the one who decides how your feelings are organized. Why would you do that to yourself? Why would you make that choice? It's a dumb choice when you think about it. But it's a choice that makes sense that enough people don't seem to have. They don't think it's a choice, so they just kind of go along with it. They said, oh no, it must be bad because they betrayed me. And all of my love for them was a lie. And that's the lie right there. That's the part that hurts. And if you never get over that lie and you can't remember the good times and laugh and say, hey, it did end bad and I don't like that part, but those 3 or 4 years or months were still what they were. And I was the right person during those months. That's the part that's really the special part. The person that you were when things were going well. That's the part that you lose when you throw the love away. So that's not a good connection. That's I didn't like not doing. I didn't like it. I had to fix it. It wasn't right.
Well, I'm happy that you fixed it, and it looks like it affected you a lot because I could just see it from your from the sensation and the vibe, even though it's over the internet, I could feel it bubbling on the inside, like this one knock you off your feet.
Yeah, it was a big one. It was like a rolling blackout so that I could put a new generator in. There was no getting around the loss of service. I'm used to keeping the lights on is what it was. And this was one of those things where a shutdown was the only, a shutdown and a reboot was really the only way out of it. So I had to knock myself out first. Well, thanks for joining me. I'll catch you in the dojo. We'll do it again.
Okay.
There's only like 6 of these left.
Yes. Good night.
See ya.
Bye.